recording this session. But do feel free to ask any questions that you have during the discussion in the chat. We will visit those during open Q&A. Once we do reach our open Q&A time, please feel free to use the Q&A function to ask your questions. All right, so Alana, we can go ahead and get started. Khushi and Trent are the hosts of a wonderful new podcast, Coping with COVID-19. I'm going to share the link for everyone in the chat. Let's see. There we go. So you can check out this wonderful new podcast. But in discussion with Alana, you'll learn more about the podcast and what it's all about. Go ahead and get started, Alana.
Sorry, I was on mute. So you guys are Trent and Khushi. So like what compelled you guys, like could you guys just tell us a little bit about the podcast and like what compelled you guys to start it?
Go ahead, Khushi.
All right, I can start this one. So our initial thing was like it was basically like quarantining over summer, and I was talking to Trent, and we were just like, we would call at least like once a week to just like check in with one another. And like one day I was like, we like have such long conversations about like the random like topics, and like a lot of it just like revolved around like COVID-19. Trent was a senior and I was a junior last year, and so like we had a lot of different experiences. And so I was like, hey, Trent, like we should start like some sort of like podcast or something. And he was like, yeah, like I'm totally down with the idea. Like, let's do it. And I was like, mind you, like we had no experience in like any sort of audio. We knew that we couldn't like meet up or anything. So we would literally like record our episodes on like Discord with like 2 phones. And like we would be like superly stayed apart, and we would just like record like random episodes about like what we could do. We developed a transcript, and we knew we wanted to keep it like COVID focused, especially because like that's what we were like living through, and we wanted something that could be like feasible like even in the long run too. So we decided to make it about like different groups of people in America and how they've helped either like combat the virus or make it worse in some ways too. And we wanted to have like a focus for each episode. So we have like a student perspective episode. And then we just recently recorded like a teacher perspective episode. There's one on like celebrities. So like these different groups in America, we decided we couldn't like categorize them into just one specific topic. And so we kind of split them apart to see like how they each individually contributed.
Yeah, Khushi answered that question really, really good. I don't know how much more I can really add other than it was kind of like Khushi said, we had talked, like we usually talked quite a bit. So it was kind of just one of those things where, hey, we talk about these like interesting ideas, and like, I feel like it would be valuable or time worthy to maybe record these and like get them down in a more organized way. And that was sort of where the idea came from. And we sort of just materialized it from there. And it's always a work in progress. You know, we had, especially recently, we had a pretty long, I guess, hiatus just because of everything with school and everything going on. You know, Khushi and I end up getting really busy, but we're hoping, especially over like Christmas break and everything, to really like get some more episodes out. And yeah, it's been a really good time so far, and we should have a couple more out within the next week or so. I might release them with a few days in between, but that's exciting too, to just have 2 more recorded. And the last one that we recorded was more about the election. We just sort of went kind of off the transcript where we normally have kind of something a little more formal written down. This time we just sort of talked. We were just going for more of a relaxed sort of vibe. And yeah, I think it's cool to have to change it up like that. And I think there's a lot of potential there, and definitely gonna keep at it.
Yeah, I think that's so cool. It's really like kind of empowering for youths. So you guys have been working together this whole time, and you've learned like things about like how to record it and stuff, but how have you guys learned to work together and like choose and come to agreements together on this?
Yeah, so I can start with this one. I like do not know anything about like video editing. So like that was like all of what Trent did. And like we kind of just like divided it up. I was like, Trent, I don't know how to edit podcasts. Like I'll be there, I'll write the transcript, I'll like create the doc and all of that. I'll publicize and all of that. But like just like the underground work, I think like Trent really stepped up and did that whole portion.
Yeah, I mean, Khushi doesn't give herself enough credit there because, okay. But yeah, Khushi, I mean, she definitely like, I feel like personally, I'm really bad at deadlines. It's something that, you know, especially when I have other stuff going on, it's just like, I'll do it later type of thing. So Khushi definitely like is more like, hey, like we started it, like we gotta finish like what we started type of thing. And like, I think that like together we do make a really good team in that sense. And it's been really good.
Yeah, and even like prior to the podcast, we were friends in like high school as well, and so like we always had a strong like dynamic. And even in like the podcast, there are times where like we often like disagree with each other, but it won't even be like we'll preface it at the beginning of the podcast like these views aren't necessarily our own. We just do it to create the podcast a little bit more lengthy and consider other perspectives. And so like we usually just like work together out. We talk it out first, and then we go ahead and develop the transcript.
Yeah, a lot of it, because Khushi and I do end up agreeing on a lot of stuff. So a lot of times we'll just sort of change our opinions slightly just to get some more perspective. And that was kind of, I think we included like a disclaimer at the start because I sort of made a joke like, oh, I want to get my hair cut during quarantine or something kind of ridiculous like that. Just to sort of say, well, hey, I mean, there are people like that out there who are actually talking about this stuff. So yeah, we don't agree with them at all, but they exist. Maybe at least just bring it up type of thing, just to gain some perspective. I feel like that's a really key idea in our podcast, is that we're going for perspective. We're trying to understand these different groups and how they're dealing with things at a time when we've never dealt with something like this ever before. So
yeah, I really appreciate that you guys like think about like different positions and everything. But actually that joke that like with the haircut actually brings me to my next question. So what do you think the importance of like including humor into like serious topics has, like, what is that importance?
I can answer this one, Khushi. I think it's really important personally, because I feel like a big part of comedy is like understanding that a lot of our comedy sort of just comes from places where we would normally be vulnerable, I guess is the best way I can describe it. Like we sort of, it's almost like a defense. So then when you're dealing with difficult topics and stuff, it's sort of, I guess it just makes it easier to deal with when you sort of kind of take a less serious stance about it, because not everything in life has to be so dramatic. So such a big deal all the time. Sometimes you just have to take a light approach to it. And I think we've tried to do our best with that. I definitely think like we can get better at it, like just talking about those issues. But you know, the only way to get better is just to keep doing it. So that's what we plan to do.
Yeah, and like to even add on to that, I just feel like it makes like the podcast entirely just more conversational. I think like oftentimes when we're just sticking to a strict script, it can almost like sound a little monotone. And so like just adding in like a little jokes, it's just like adds in personality. It allows the audience and the listeners to like get an idea of who we are as people. And so that also just in turns allows them to like trust us more, trust the content that we put out. So.
Yeah, definitely. I really appreciate it. Made me laugh a little bit. So I like that. So obviously you guys have done this during the pandemic, which kind of spurred it, but like what were the biggest I know you guys talked about like you guys use like Discord, but what were other challenges that you encountered collaborating over like the COVID time?
Well, audio has always kind of been an issue. So even in our last recording, it's kind of a little, we're just sort of figuring small things out that we didn't know before. So like, for example, like going through the audio, I realized that if one of us aren't wearing headphones, then there's like an echo. So then I have to cut the audio into separate chunks. So there's no, in a normal conversation, if someone's talking, you might be saying something in the background, like, yeah, I agree, something like that, to kind of show that you're listening, show that you're there. But when you have the echo, you can't really have that. So it sounds a bit funny sometimes where like someone cracks a joke, but I can't include the other person's laugh because of the echo and stuff like that. So it sort of comes off a little odd, but it's almost fitting for this time because it reminds me of like the late night shows. Like I watch like Seth Meyers and he cracks a joke, but no one's in the audience. So then it's like you hear like his camera crew maybe laughing like really far in the background. So it's sort of like that. So maybe in a way it's sort of fitting, but also it's just a quick note. Hey, next time let's wear headphones. So then it's more conversational and just trying to figure out small things like that. And we've always been building as time goes on. But I definitely think like, obviously if we were in the same room and we use like the same microphone, like I have like a studio microphone, like a Yeti. If we could both use that, that would obviously be easier, but you know, COVID pandemic, you do what you can. And I think we've been working with it pretty well, I think.
Yeah, I agree. So I see that Lynn has asked, what has been your favorite podcast topic so far? And like, tell us about the show, like that episode and why it's your favorite.
I would say my favorite episode was the student perspective one, especially just because like me and Trent, we could really relate to some of the people that we interviewed. And we thought that interviewing was like such an important idea because like, yeah, me and Trent have our own perspective and our own take to add about how we've been dealing with the pandemic, but like it goes beyond that. Everyone learns differently, especially during this pandemic. Some people like prefer online school while others don't. And so like just seeing how my peers have been handling it, especially because, you know, you can see like friend circles and conversation between us, like they've died a little bit because of it. And people have become more like reserved. And so like just being able to get that student perspective out there was honestly really nice. During the podcast, we talked about a lot of different things with them. Main stuff we asked them was like how they've been coping with it. Basically, how have their learning styles changed? If they haven't changed, why not? What do they kind of anticipate in the future? What kind of precautions have they been taking? So just like a lot of those like basic questions, but like it was really surprising to hear how like people still had like super different perspectives. Like there were some people who like did prefer online school, and there were some people who like missed those like really strong conversations that were in the classroom. So it was really nice to hear those.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with Khushi on the student perspective being my favorite in terms of just impact, I would say, and like gaining perspective. I think it was definitely really helpful. And I think my favorite one to record so far is one that we're going to release next week, which was the one about the election, just because it was a little more candid. It wasn't scripted and everything. And it felt more just like a relaxed podcast type of deal. And that was a lot of fun to record. I had a lot of fun doing that. So I hope we can do that more.
Yeah. So Khushi, you talked like you guys talked about the interviewing people. So how did that go? Like getting different people from that like didn't know like your podcast like kind of construction, and then like how did you get them to like how did you like be like, oh, can I interview you? Like what was that process like?
Yeah, so we interviewed three groups of people. So we interviewed students, and then we interviewed teachers and our Wayne Memorial Principal, Dr. Anderson, and then we also interviewed a few community members. So the way that we like went about this was in terms of students, we just picked people that Trent and I both knew. So we knew we had a point of contact to reach out to them. And then with teachers, me and Trent picked teachers that we both had. And just because like we were familiar with the way that they taught, and so we would be able to kind of dig deeper into the way that they taught and ask them more, I guess like higher thinking questions, and just go a little bit deeper into their teaching style. And then for the community members, we went on to the Wayne Westland discussion board and the Westland Community News on Facebook. Since a lot of people and a lot of community members follow those pages, we just kind of like reached out to people. We reached out to like local businesses if they were willing to just get interviewed. And then we sent them a list of questions to kind of like prepare for. And then we obviously said that like we would give you like full credit for you being into the podcast and everything like that. So, yep.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to just reach out to people and just one thing, I mean, we did get, I believe from what the one of the state senators, you reached out to a state senator, right, Khushi? And we got a no from them.
Yeah.
But it was worth a shot. But for the most part, everybody we talked to, especially like local community, was more than willing to be interviewed. A lot of people, especially when COVID first happened, were excited to get a platform and talk about just what's going on. Even though we're not super established or anything, they were just saying, hey, reach out to the community and talk about things going on. And yeah, we found that people were more than willing to talk, and that was really a cool thing to see.
I agree. That's like super cool. So what do you think that like youths and adults can take away from your podcast? Sorry, do you need me to re-say that? I don't know if it was bad quality.
No, just a really good question.
Okay.
I guess like one thing that we would want them to take away is to just like remain open-minded to different things, like because we consider so many different perspectives and we have so many different types of interviews. And then also like we almost like subtly hint at like the things that people can do to combat COVID-19. Like that was like our initial goal, is like coping with it. And then once you've like coped with it and understood that this is like the new reality that we're going to be living in, kind of like how you can do and help contribute to that. And so I think like in our election podcast, we kind of highlight some of that in there. And then we also just like talk about in the one of the celebrity episodes how we mentioned like this example of like Priyanka Chopra clapping on her porch versus someone who is like donating money, making masks at home. And so like just seeing those like two parallels, we almost serve as like not necessarily like an established news outlet, because like we say that like we don't know all of the facts yet, but we do present ourselves with like strong concrete opinions of how people can go about kind of reducing the risk of COVID.
Yeah, I think I had said it before, but again, the main idea is kind of just getting perspective. I feel like anyone who watches it, even if they're from like one of our groups that we had, like students or even teachers or something, there's always something to gain from understanding someone else's perspective and how they're personally dealing with it. Then another thing I would say is just being able to engage in like an honest conversation, and just especially now, just when Khushi and I have like a small disagreement or something in our podcast, just being able to talk it out, right? You don't have to hate the other person because you disagree with them on something, even if it is a moral thing, because not that there's always middle ground, because there isn't always middle ground, but there's definitely, those conversations need to happen. And I feel like that's a really good takeaway that people should have from our podcast. And I hope they do.
Yeah, and like another thing is just like oftentimes youth voice can go unnoticed, especially during times like this when people are like looking for quote unquote like more reliable adult resources, right? And so like just for us to be able to like share how we've been dealing with it, it not only validates like everything that we're going through, but it also just sheds light on like how important youth voice is during this time.
I agree. I definitely think, well, the whole point of us being here is the youth voice. So I think that's really cool. So earlier you guys mentioned like you're covering like the election and when your podcast is coming up, right? So what do you think that means for like the youth in our community who like can't vote yet? What is the like importance of you guys talking about that and like youth in our community being aware of politics?
I can start, Khushi. So yeah, I think the obvious takeaway would be make sure you vote when you're 18. I think that's just really important, just to express your vote. It's so important. I mean, when I was at Wayne sophomore year, Khushi and I actually were involved in it, the voter drive that we did with Arisa. And that was, I mean, it just shows, even from high school, like it's important to understand as early as you can how important voting is. You have anything to add to that, Khushi?
Yeah, it just, again, like what Trent said, like it's important to vote. Like even though I can't vote, like I helped my grandparents vote. And so that was interesting, like just being educated on like where your nearest like polling place is, what the candidates each stand for, like stuff like that goes a long way, because those people that are in your circle and in your network who don't know, you're able to tell them and just educate them on that. So it was nice. And just like also just like being like politically aware is so important, because you know you may not be able to vote, but the decisions that are being voted on will affect you. So it's important.
Yeah, for sure. So is there anything that you like want your listeners to know before they listen to your podcast, or maybe even like after they have listened, what is something important that you want them to know that you might not have said in the podcast?
We briefly touched on this a little bit, but basically at the beginning of the podcast, when we're talking about like controversial topics, we usually just like set a disclaimer or preface it by saying that like the views presented in this podcast are not necessarily our own. They're just here to enhance the episode. So we do that at the beginning of every episode usually.
Yeah, as far as things that we don't say at all in the podcast, I think I would probably have to go back to the point about just being able to have conversations like this. Like we don't explicitly ever say that, like, oh, people should be having these conversations like Khushi and I, but just understanding that, you know, even if you're not recording yourself and you're not doing a podcast, like Khushi and I would have conversations similar to the podcast all the time for years before this, you know? So just having a good conversations and a good person to talk to about it is always really important, especially now with everything going on politically. It's important to talk about it because sometimes, for me especially, and I'm sure a lot of other people feel the same way, when you talk through something, especially something really complicated like elections today and things like that, it starts to make a lot more sense. So yeah, it's all about learning. It's all about getting a little better every day.
Yeah, and like the main thing is like we try not to like limit ourselves like in terms of like what topics that we're going to be talking about, because you know like if we're going to say that we're going to be like super strict, oftentimes that takes away from the authentic dialogue that we would have had before. So we try not to set like too many guidelines, and I think that like Trent and I have been getting a lot better at this by like reducing the amount of words that we put into the transcript, or even if we do type it all out, we kind of like go a little bit like off track and include like dialogue that we didn't even write. And so like we really think that like the best conversation happens when it's unplanned.
Yeah, yes, I agree. So you guys have like mentioned learning and growing like as you like have been moving through the podcast. So is there any other ways besides, because I know you guys have learned about like how to deal with like the technology side of it and then like your scripting and like how that flows, but is there any other things that you guys have learned like even about each other or anything else?
So what we learned about each other or just in general from doing the podcast, is that kind of what you're asking?
Yeah, like anything in general, like anything that you've seen like from the beginning, like how have you grown together?
Well, definitely just being able to like complete something. It's definitely, I think, really cool. And I think that really, if anything, the podcast kind of symbolizes like getting through quarantine, if that makes sense. Just sort of, it wouldn't be a thing, you know, if COVID wasn't a thing. So it's sort of a symbolism for that. How are we coping with COVID-19? We're making a podcast. So that's kind of our own perspective, I guess, behind all the other perspectives that we try to share every episode.
Yeah, and like I guess also like I hate to bring it back to the perspective thing, but it's really important, so I'm going to do it anyway. But basically like, you know, I'm like during quarantine, like I was scrolling through like social media, and like most of like my feed would be headline with some of like the same topics and some of the same things that I'm already used to seeing, like things that I'm already like agreeing with and everything. But then during some of our episodes when we have to like research different opinions just to kind of understand and get a I guess like a full round understanding of the topics. Like I have to research the other side of it. And so like that really like deepened my understanding, and it also like helped me like strengthen my own position, right? So it was kind of a win-win situation on both.
Yeah, I think just to share a kind of like funny story, there was a point where I had an idea. We sort of abandoned it because it didn't seem like a good idea. It was sort of just a throw it out there, why not type of thing. And I saw a video on Twitter of this lady who had gotten thrown out of the Capitol, the state Capitol, because it wasn't open to the public at the time, but she was protesting and said it was her right to be there. And then the security threw her out, and it was a really big thing. But I found the Facebook group that she was the founder of, or the president of, I don't know the official term. So then I joined it on Facebook and thought, oh, what if I can reach out to this lady and sort of get her perspective? Because personally, obviously I'm biased. I'm a person. I'm not anti-mask. I'm not like anti shutdown and stuff like that. But she definitely was. So what would that provide? But in the end, we sort of abandoned that just because it might be a little too far. It might not work out. I mean, who knows? We'll come back to it or not, but probably not. But I forgot what my original point was with that. I think I just wanted to tell that story. But I guess just the fact that we weren't afraid to maybe possibly get that perspective is an important takeaway in its own right. Just not stopping. Just, hey, these people are a lot different than us, but I mean, they're out there. We can't ignore them. I mean, everyone's vote counts.
Absolutely. Way to engage. That's incredible. And it's a great story. I'm glad you shared it. All right, so now we're going to move on to our sort of open Q&A. Please feel free, any of our attendees, please feel free to use the Q&A portion to share your questions. We already have a couple. I know we have one in the chat that I'll share first, and then we'll move to the Q&A. This question is from Connor, and he asks, which element of making the podcast, preparing scripts, finding interviewees, recording, editing audio, promotion, etc., do you each find either particularly fun or challenging? And how much time do you spend on these elements relative to one another?
I can start. I guess my favorite part, but also the most challenging part on my end would be just like finding a topic, just because like we want it to be something that obviously fits like our title, coping with COVID-19. But, we also want to create a topic that we know is going to be like engaging, or something that's like usually like not very much like talked about, especially on like the student youth voice perspective. And so that's one thing that's like a bit challenging, but it's also like the most fun. And then obviously developing the transcript takes the longest time, because that's basically like the bulk of our podcast. It's what we're going to be talking about, what we're going to include. And then we obviously kind of, if we interview people, we have to kind of take those chunks and then mold it into our own dialogue.
Yeah, I think definitely, like Khushi said, the most time consuming part is definitely writing the transcript, because some of them get pretty lengthy. Like I think our last one that we recorded was, I think, just over 8 pages, which isn't a whole lot, but it does take a little bit of time to develop because we both work on it at the same time on the same Google Doc. So just making sure we're on the same page leading up to it and stuff, so we're not just writing randomly, like blindly in the dark, takes a little bit of time. Just getting to that point where we're both kind of, we talk about it a bit, just, unscripted, just talking through the topic that we decided on. And then when we're both kind of on the same page where we want to go, then we start writing. And then I would say that definitely the most rewarding, but also the most difficult for me would be the actual editing of the audio and putting together the podcast, because on one hand, it's kind of tedious and a lot of kind of annoying to do, but obviously that's what you have to do to get your final product. And then just being able to finish it, export, and then upload, that's definitely the most satisfying moment, is when you have all this work that you put into something and it all just kind of comes together at the same time. That's the best moment to me.
Wonderful. Great answers, you guys. Thank you. All right. Our next question comes from William. He asks, thinking of high school students during this pandemic, are there any specific strategies you have that would enhance a student's perception that the school/community cares about them?
So as I know Mr. Gray, I know he would ask some sort of type of question like this, but basically I would say like, I think that's like one thing that even like at our school, like teachers and our administration, they've been trying to find out like how can we tell them that the school and community cares about them. And I think like a lot of it just goes in with like teachers and like the people that they interact with every day. So I know like, for example, in some of like my classes, instead of feeling like too isolated, there are often times where we'll have like discussions in person, and this is different from like the Google Classroom, like written discussions, because that still feels isolated, but like being able to like do group work, even virtually, at least that's one thing that like I miss a lot, just makes me like feel like my peers and stuff care about me, as well as like my teachers acknowledging that like me and contributing to the class discussion is important and valid. So that's, I guess, like one thing. And then another thing is, I guess, just like our community being like conscious of the fact that like online school is hard and it's like mentally draining for a lot of people, including me. I think that that's really important. And then from there, like developing ways that like, whether it's like lessening the amount of like homework and stuff that we have, or creating like resources in place that are really facilitated towards like increasing people's like mental health and making them more happier, especially because I think like a lot of people's like coping strategy when schools were in session was just like hanging out with their friends during lunch or something like that. And now that like we no longer have that, I think it's like really important to really like take I guess in-depth look at like how much work are we really giving these students, and how can we kind of correlate that with like how they're doing mentally.
Yeah, I think kind of going off. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Okay. So going off, kind of, I guess what I've been experiencing lately would be that it kind of sometimes feels like no one else is going through what you're going through. But it's important to know that even though your experience is unique, a lot of people are going through very similar experiences to you, because a lot of people are stuck at home and going through a hard time with school and stuff, and just being on their computer for hours at a time. You know, something tells me I'm a little over my recommended screen time for the day every single day. But I guess we kind of just ignore that fact now. It's not relevant in the Zoom era. But just knowing that you can reach out to your teachers, and they're, I think, more than likely going to be understanding, especially now, because they're probably, having a pretty hard time with classes too. They haven't done anything like this before. So just knowing that if you give, the more feedback you give them, the better it's going to be for everyone.
And just to like touch on one more thing, I think like right now during this time, it's not enough to like be sympathetic, like you have to be empathetic. And I think that like that's not even something that's a stretch, like we're all going through the same thing. So it's not hard to put yourself into like someone else's shoes. Obviously like the, I guess, level of how much we've all been like coping and like suffering differs. But I think that at the end of the day, like we all want limited screen time. We all want to be able to go outside finally. And so like, it really is just like something that we all have to work on together. And again, like what Trent said, is making like the fact that teachers are available to you more out there. I know like at Wayne, we have like office hours, and most of our teachers usually stay back during this time. So I think like, instead of that time maybe being allotted for like questions about homework, which it can be for like maybe the last half, but like the first half can just be allotted for like, hey, how are you doing? Like, what can we do to like help you? Like asking those questions, I think like even before like class starts goes a long way.
Also, just to bring up something real quick, Khushi mentioned going outside and going on walks and stuff. That's important. Even if you don't feel like it, go outside because you need it. A lot of times I don't feel like going on a walk, but I still force myself to go, and I feel way better afterwards, because if you study for hours at a time and you're just cooped inside hours at a time, even if you weren't productive, which hopefully you were, but if not, it's okay. Just go outside, just take a walk. It'll help.
Yeah, I agree with like all of that, like what they said, but I think especially like how like teachers or like people can make like students feel like the community and like the school cares about them is specifically like gauging where your students are at, because like it's a lot of students won't really speak up, but they're like drowning in like it's not even just like emotions, or it's also like schoolwork and like all their things go, because like people, like even though like the pandemic has brought a lot of like things to a halt, there's still like a lot of things going on. Like there still are sports even though there's a break right now, so like gauging how your students are doing and like what they're doing is like really important.
Absolutely. Yeah, we need to be checking in as much as possible and asking the right questions for sure. Wonderful. Thank you. All right. Our next question is from Brianna, who asks, have you ever done research and it changed your opinion? So have you ever done any research for a topic that ended up changing your opinion on the topic? It's a good question.
I'm drawing a blank on this one, Khushi. What are you thinking?
Yeah, a little bit. I guess like I don't think I've completely ever changed my opinion. If anything, like I've critiqued my own opinion and then found ways to like strengthen it by saying like, okay, like if someone was to like say this to me, how would I respond in a way that's not like attacking them, because that's not going to change their opinion. That's not going to educate them further. They're just not going to want to listen to me, right? So I've just found ways to be like, okay, here's like, have you considered this? Have you looked at this resource or something like that? Like there have been times where like, I'll admit, like I've got into a few like, you know, like social media, like not arguments, at least I don't like to call it that, but like discussions. And like, you know, I try not to like, just like say like random things like, oh no, like that's completely wrong, because like, they obviously don't think it is. So like, it's not going to sway them one way or another. Rather, you know, I'd be like, hey, like, what about this fact? Or have you considered like looking at it through this lens, this way? I think that that goes a long way. I don't think I've ever personally changed my opinion. If anything, I've just found ways to make it stronger.
Yeah, I think the best example I can give that's as specific as I can make it would be in the first episode we made about celebrities. I think that because we weren't interviewing anyone for that, the answer was a little less clear, because we were trying to answer if you're famous, what do you do in a pandemic? I mean, people are sort of looking to you. So do you stand on your porch and clap, or do you like, what do you do? Like, is there, what's the right solution? And obviously I think that the more we researched, the more I found that people were very, not even just unresponsive, but angry for celebrities who are, you know, very well off and are known to be very well off because they're celebrities people know. Just seeing them not giving anything out and just saying thank you, that was really almost looked down upon. Like people would make fun of it, you know, they thought it was pretty ridiculous. So just knowing that, I guess I didn't know that the right answer for a celebrity would be to be making legitimate donations and helping out, which, I mean, it seems obvious because that's what people should be doing, is giving what they can. But I guess I didn't really think too hard about it before we started doing the podcast. So if anything, it just sort of brought that perspective to light, if that makes sense.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. One more question is from Misha. He asks, has participating in this project changed the way you're coping with COVID? And if so, how?
I guess like Trent mentioned a little bit earlier in this webinar that like our way of coping with COVID was like creating this podcast. And I guess like for my outlook, like I would have never thought I would be creating a podcast. So like it's trying something new. And, like I also joined this community of creative champions with Bright Futures. And like, I'm not someone that's like very artsy, the best I can draw is a stick figure. So like being able to like create these like social media posts and having like conversations like this, even from my bedroom, I think it has just like shown me ways that there are different ways and I guess like different platforms out there that you can really like join in on and still have the same effect that it did when you were in person with people.
Yeah, I would say that I definitely gained, using the word that we saved so much during this interview, is perspective. I mean, you know, it's just really cool to have the opportunity to be doing something that I guess is at least semi-proactive especially during quarantine, where it wasn't just the days flying by. It was really, I'm reaching out to, you know, the mayor of the town or the mayor of Wayne, and then I'm reaching out to our principal, Dr. Anderson. So just having those conversations during a time where not many people are having conversations was definitely really valuable and still is. So just knowing that, I think a good takeaway would be things aren't always perfect when we're making it. You know, there's definitely things that we would change, you know, some audio issues, some writing things, whatever, what have you, but just doing it, you know, just going out there and saying, all right, let's try it. Let's see what happens. Because you have to sort of put perfection to the side and just say, okay, at what point are we just willing to put our content out there the best that we're able to do, rather than, oh, it's not completely perfect, therefore we can't release it. And just doing it, you know, just going for it.
Yeah, and I guess like another thing that I would add is like this was just like a way for us to like, I guess even in a way like continue to be like academically challenged. I think that oftentimes when we think of like excellence and like doing something really good, we think of like long-term goals like creating or like getting landing a job that you've always wanted, getting into like college or something like that. But like developing a podcast, like at least for like me and Trent, it was something that was like meaningful, and it was something that we had to do like research for. And I think that like these fine arts departments often don't get enough credit for what they do, and often like we focus a lot more on like STEM and stuff like that. Like although we weren't like solving math equations, like we were researching and finding like credible resources which all kind of go towards academics.
Wonderful. Well, Khushi and Trent, thank you so much for being with us today. For all of our attendees, Trent and Khushi are the hosts again of this amazing podcast, Coping with COVID-19. The link is in the chat. Please do give it a listen if you haven't already. Trent and Khushi, when can we expect? Oh, we have one more question. Ah, wonderful. One more question. James asks, what are your plans for this second surge? New topics on the horizon?
Definitely. I think that we haven't really fleshed out any specific, excuse me, sorry, I got a text on my phone. But we haven't really fleshed out any specific topics yet, but we definitely, Khushi and I just have normal conversations, and that sort of is what turns into the topics. So definitely, I think not only the second surge, but also talks of vaccine, how the election is going to change things. And just looking more, I think we've always put emphasis on a local level because we both believe that community is really important. So looking at these national issues is something we'll talk about for sure. But just going back to seeing how, you know, in Michigan, we're back at square one now with everything shut down again. So how are people dealing with it now? Are people just over it? Have they decided that COVID no longer exists and are just going to ignore it? Or are they going to stick by it? And I think there's a lot to explore there, and I think it's really exciting. And that COVID is definitely, you know, hindered us in a lot of ways, but at the same time, it's opened a lot of doors. And I think that's the most optimistic way we can look at it, is that we've never dealt with things like this before, you know, socially, academically, culturally. So it sucks, but also there's a lot of opportunity to explore these things that we've never explored, not only through podcasts, but also entertainment, you know, different new medias. There's a lot of potential there. And I think that people need to pay attention to that potential and work with it. That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I think Trent summed it up pretty well. The only other idea that I had was maybe doing like another round of interviews, whether it's with the same people or different people, to just see how things have changed for them, and then just, you know, their opinions on what's been happening on the national and local levels.
Wonderful. Well, if we have any more questions, oh, we do. Excellent. Alina asks, what advice would you guys give for someone who wants to start their own podcast? Very good question, Alina.
You start, Khushi?
Yeah, I can start. I guess like the first thing is like you would have to decide if you want to like do it yourself or do it with another person, and even it can be with like a group of people. And then I think like one thing that Trent and I found like useful was kind of like, what do you want to really focus on? I think that if you choose like a really like super big topic that doesn't really encompass a lot of different features, I think you might get a little bit lost of the direction that you want to go into. So like maybe just having some sort of direction, and then you can like talk freely if you want to. Like I said before, I think like the best discussion comes from like unplanned discussions. So at least like I think that. So I think that would help a lot. And then another thing is just to like be yourself. Don't like, you know, filter yourself thinking like, oh, like what if people don't like that I say this, because like not many people like agree with it, or how will people look at me if like I talk about this like random topic that is like so long gone or so in history. But like don't limit yourself. Everything's open. There are like podcasts ranging from like topics that you would have never heard of to topics that are like super specific, but you wouldn't even realize how many different types of information that you could find in them. So like, I guess just like remain open-minded and consider all your options.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of going off a few points that Khushi made, I would say if you're not passionate about whatever topic you choose, and that could be really anything, then don't pursue it. Because if you don't enjoy talking about it in your own time, you're definitely not going to enjoy writing about it and forcing yourself to do it. Just because you think that it might grab people's attention, if you don't actually care about that topic, whatever it is, don't pursue it. I mean, that's just really because a podcast is not it's not like you're getting graded for it. It's not like you're forced to do it. So you better actually like to do it, or you're probably not going to end up doing it. And if you do, you're definitely not going to enjoy it. So at that point, I mean, that's number one. You know, you're going to have times where you don't feel like doing it, but if you don't like your overall message, and if you're not willing to put it out there and you just don't really care enough, then don't pursue it. You know, go after something you're passionate about. That would be my best advice.
Yeah, and like something on the more like technical side of it, don't like compare yourself to these other podcasts who have like thousands of dollars in equipment and like gear to make like their audio quality like A1 or anything like that. Like Trent and I literally used Discord. We put in headphones and we like spoke and recorded it off like an iPad or something like that. And like you don't need like super up-to-date software or anything. These a lot more like established podcasts, they have these kinds of equipment because they've gained like so much popularity and stuff like that. But like don't it's a starting point, you know. It takes a lot of time to build and stuff like that. So don't get discouraged because you don't have the same amount of equipment and the same amount of like resources as other people do.
Yeah, and you'll figure that out along the way. If you start, you know, when we first started, our audio was the quality wasn't very good, just because I thought if I recorded over my computer and I captured Khushi's audio through that and made the process a little more simple, that it would work out. But then I realized that connection is a problem because we're online. So then Khushi's audio wasn't quite as good as mine because it's from the call. So then I had Khushi record the audio on her own and send it to me, and just kind of troubleshooting as you move on. These are things that you can't really always anticipate, especially if you haven't done it before. But you figure it out along the way. And I would say just don't be afraid to go and try it, because you'll make mistakes and things aren't going to be perfect, but you'll get there, and just keep going.
Thank you guys, and best of luck to all those new podcasters who are listening. Yeah, congratulations. It's great. All right, do we have any other questions? Last call for questions. Anyone wants to put them in the Q&A? If we don't have any further questions, I'd like to thank Trent and Khushi for sharing their wisdom with us and sharing their voices. We are so happy to have you with us. For those of you who don't know, this is an event put on by the community of creative champions. We are a group that is dedicated to amplifying the youth voice in Southeast Michigan. We are a subsidiary of EMU Bright Futures. And yeah, we run an online publication through the EMU Bright Futures website. It is a blog and a gallery that features the art and writing of young artists and writers in our area. I'm putting the link right here in our chat for everyone. During our cozy conversations each month, we are going to be having a open mic session where some of our youth writers and contributors to the blog can share a piece that they wrote. Oh, and I'll say the EMU Bright Futures is a 21st Century Learning Centers program, and it's funded by the Michigan Department of Education, and so are we. So many thanks to them, and also many thanks to EMU and Eric Kirkland, who set up this webinar for us. So many thanks to our funders and our helpers and our sponsors. But now we're going to move on to our sort of open mic portion. Each month, we are going to be inviting contributors to our blog to share pieces that they've written for the blog. If you are a young writer or artist and are interested in contributing to our online publication, please do visit the link that I just posted in the chat. I'm also posting a link to our Facebook, which has links to the rest of our social media as well. So you can connect with us there. But this month, Khushi is one of our main contributors to the blog at present. And she wrote a beautiful piece that she's going to share with us today. Khushi, whenever you're ready, you can share with us your beautiful writing.
So I can just talk a little bit about my piece freely, and then you guys can save the time and kind of read it on your own. But basically, I wrote two pieces. The first one was, it was along the lines of like how I've been coping with COVID, and a little bit about like my home life versus this guilt feeling of like me kind of like sitting down to like read a book or record a podcast versus like me not like going out and like canvassing or I don't know, I guess like speaking up or something like that. So like I just kind of talk about the two parallels between that. And then my most recent publication was on the Black Lives Matter movement and the murder of George Floyd. And I kind of talk a little bit about how people who aren't Black can help towards that community and the ways in which we can support them, especially during this time.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Khushi. Yes, you can read Khushi's writing on our blog. That's accessible through the link I shared, and more. There's more poetry by other writers, and hopefully soon we'll have more content for you there as well. Please do contribute to that content. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email creativechampsmi@gmail.com. All right. Thank you, everyone, for participating today. I'm so glad you could be with us. We hope that you can join us next month for our next Cozy Convo. We will have new guests, new panelists, new young voices. And please do try to amplify the young voices in your life because the youth voice matters and it is an essential part of our community. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful Saturday.